I regret marrying you, he said with a smirk. But he wasn't smiling after I showed what was inside the envelope. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. I regret marrying you, he said with that smirk I'd grown to despise over the past 3 years. The same smirk that used to make my heart skip a beat when we first met at that conference in Chicago. Now it made my stomach turn. We were sitting in Chez Laurent, the same restaurant where he'd proposed 7 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. The soft candlelight that once felt romantic now cast sinister shadows across his face, highlighting the cruel twist of his lips as he leaned back in his chair, wineglass in hand, looking every bit the successful investment banker he'd worked so hard to become. "Do you?" I asked quietly, my fingers tracing the edge of the manila envelope that lay beside my barely touched salmon. "Do you really regret it, Marcus?" His laugh was sharp, cutting through the gentle murmur of other diners' conversations. "Look at yourself, Sarah. When was the last time you even tried? When did you become so ordinary?" I smiled then, a genuine smile that seemed to catch him off guard. "You know what? You're absolutely right." That's when I opened the envelope. But let me start from the beginning, because every good story needs context, and this one has been 7 years in the making. I met Marcus Blackwell at a pharmaceutical conference in Chicago. I was 29, a research scientist working on breakthrough cancer treatments, passionate about my work and naive about love. He was 33, already making a name for himself in investment banking, specializing in healthcare acquisitions. Tall, dark hair, always perfectly styled, wearing suits that cost more than my monthly rent. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room when he focused on you. "You're brilliant," he told me that first night over drinks at the hotel bar. "Most people in your field are so clinical, but you talk about your research like it's poetry." I fell hard and fast. Within 6 months, I'd moved from Boston to New York to be closer to him. Within a year, we were living together in his Upper East Side apartment. The proposal came at this very restaurant, Chez Laurent, on a snowy February evening. He got down on one knee, right here at table 12, presenting me with a ring that cost more than my car. "Sarah Chen," he'd said, "you're going to change the world, and I want to be right there beside you when you do." I said yes, of course. How could I not? I was in love with a man who saw my potential, who encouraged my dreams, who made me feel like I could conquer anything. The first year of marriage was everything I'd hoped for. We traveled together, attended charity galas, hosted dinner parties where I'd meet fascinating people from his world. I continued my research, publishing papers that gained international attention. Marcus would beam with pride when introducing me as my wife, the brilliant scientist who's going to cure cancer. But success has a funny way of changing people, or maybe it just reveals who they really were all along. The changes started small. "Maybe you should consider switching to a more commercial lab," he suggested one evening as I excitedly told him about a potential breakthrough in immunotherapy. Something with better funding, more prestige. No, enfin, when I explained that prestige wasn't the point, that I was on the verge of something that could save lives, his smile tightened. "Of course, darling. I just want what's best for your career." Then came the comments about my appearance. "You know, Jennifer's wife always looks so put together at these events," he'd say, referring to his colleague's spouse, a former model who'd given up her career to be the perfect corporate wife. "Maybe we should get you a stylist." I started spending more on clothes, more time on my hair and makeup. When that wasn't enough, the suggestions became more pointed. "Dr. Rodriguez in my building does amazing work. Very subtle. Maybe just something around the eyes?" The insidious thing about gaslighting is how gradually it happens. Like a frog in slowly boiling water, you don't realize you're being cooked alive until it's almost too late. Each comment, each suggestion, each disappointed look chipped away at my confidence until I started questioning my own judgment about everything. "You're being too sensitive," became his favorite phrase. When I complained about him canceling our dinner plans for the third time in a row, I was being too sensitive. When I mentioned that he never asked about my research anymore, I was being too sensitive. When I pointed out that he'd forgotten our anniversary, well, I was definitely being too sensitive. The affairs started in year 3, or at least that's when I first suspected. He'd always traveled for work, but suddenly there were more conferences, more client dinners, more emergency meetings that kept him out until the early morning hours. When I tried to talk to him about feeling disconnected, he turned it back on me. "Maybe if you made more of an effort," he'd say. "Maybe if you weren't so focused on your little lab experiments. Maybe if you understood what it takes to build real success." My little lab experiments. That's what my life's work had become to him. I threw myself into trying to be the wife he seemed to want. I took a leave of absence from my research position, something I told myself was temporary. I hired a personal trainer, got those subtle procedures he'd suggested, learned to make his favorite dishes from scratch. I became a master at hosting dinner parties, skilled at making conversation with his colleagues' wives about nothing of substance, while our husbands discussed important matters. But it was never enough. I was never enough. The breaking point came 6 months ago. I'd been having trouble sleeping, plagued by a gnawing feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with my life. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with panic attacks, feeling like I was suffocating in my own skin. My doctor prescribed sleeping pills, but they left me groggy and disconnected during the day. It was during one of these restless nights that I decided to organize Marcus's study. He'd been complaining about not being able to find important documents, and I thought if I could just get his papers in order, maybe he'd appreciate the effort. Maybe he'd remember why he fell in love with me. That's when I found the first batch of photos. They were tucked inside a folder labeled Quarterly Reports, but they definitely weren't financial documents. 23 photos of Marcus with a blonde woman I didn't recognize. They were taken at various locations: a restaurant, a hotel lobby, what looked like a vacation resort. In every single one, they were all over each other. My hands were shaking as I stared at a photo of my husband kissing another woman on what was clearly a beach somewhere tropical. The timestamp showed it was taken 2 months ago, when he'd told me he was in Cleveland for a banking conference. I sat on the floor of his study until sunrise, looking through every folder, every drawer, every hiding spot I could think of. What I found was evidence of a double life I never could have imagined. There were receipts for jewelry I'd never seen, hotel bills for romantic getaways I'd never taken, credit card statements showing thousands of dollars spent at high-end restaurants during times he'd told me he was working late. There were printouts of text messages to multiple women, each one more explicit than the last. But the worst part wasn't the cheating. It was reading what he really thought about me. In a text to someone named Amber, he'd written, "She used to be so impressive, but now she's just pathetic. Still thinks she's going to cure cancer while she can barely manage to keep houseplants alive. The sex is terrible, too. She just lies there like a dead fish." To Jessica, "I should have married someone like you instead. Someone who knows how to take care of herself. Sarah's let herself go completely. I'm embarrassed to be seen with her half the time." And to Vanessa, "She has no idea how the real world works. Thinks her little science experiments matter more than building actual wealth. It's honestly embarrassing. I'm basically supporting a grown child." I remember sitting there as the sun came up, feeling something inside me crack and then harden. Not break, harden. Like coal under pressure becoming diamond. That's when I started planning. The first thing I did was make copies of everything. Every photo, every receipt, every degrading text message. I bought a scanner and spent the next week methodically documenting 7 years of lies. I organized it all in chronological order, creating a timeline of deception that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Next, I contacted David Kim, the best divorce attorney in Manhattan. David had handled the divorces of several high-profile wives of Wall Street executives, and his reputation was legendary. When I walked into his office with 3 bankers' boxes of evidence, he actually smiled. "Mrs. Blackwell," he said after reviewing just the first box, "your husband is about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating intelligent women." It turned out that Marcus had made several critical mistakes. First, he'd been using joint credit cards and accounts for his affairs, creating a clear paper trail of marital misconduct. Second, he'd been so arrogant about his infidelity that he'd kept physical evidence in our shared home. Third, and most importantly, he'd apparently forgotten that I wasn't just some random woman he could discard. I was Dr. Sarah Chen, holder of 3 patents in pharmaceutical research, with assets and earning potential he'd consistently undervalued. The prenup he insisted on? David explained. It becomes null and void in cases of proven adultery with multiple partners. Every joint asset, including the apartment, the house in the Hamptons, and his precious art collection, becomes subject to equitable distribution. And given the level of emotional distress and damage to your career you can demonstrate, we're looking at a very favorable split. But David's plan was just the beginning. I had bigger ideas. The next person I contacted was Miranda Walsh, a private investigator who specialized in corporate infidelity cases. Miranda was a former FBI agent with a talent for uncovering information that people thought was buried forever. Your husband's been sloppy, she told me after just 2 weeks of investigation. He's been using company resources for personal travel, claiming personal expenses as business costs, and this is the big one. He's been insider trading based on information from his affairs. That last part made my blood run cold. What do you mean? 3 of the women he's been involved with work for companies his firm has advised on acquisitions. He's been getting confidential information pillow talk and using it to make strategic investments. It's textbook securities fraud. I felt a smile spread across my face for the first time in months. How much evidence do you have? Enough to put him away for 5 to 10 years. But Sarah, Miranda's expression grew serious. Are you sure you want to go nuclear? This won't just end your marriage. This will end his entire life as he knows it. I thought about all the nights I'd lain awake wondering what was wrong with me. All the times I'd apologized for being too sensitive. All the dreams I'd abandoned trying to become the woman he wanted. All the cruel things he'd said about me to his mistresses. I'm sure. The final piece of my plan involved Dr. Elizabeth Harper, my former research director. I'd been avoiding her calls for months, too embarrassed to admit that I'd essentially abandoned my career for a man who saw me as an accessory. When I finally called her back, she was thrilled to hear from me. Sarah, please tell me you're ready to come back. The immunotherapy project you started has stalled completely without you. We've got funding for 5 more years, and I need my star researcher back. That's when I learned that my little lab experiments had been approved for human trials. The breakthrough I'd been working on when I took my leave of absence was now being fast-tracked by the FDA. Dr. Harper wanted me to lead the entire program. There's a signing bonus, she added. $200,000 plus a salary increase to $350,000. You'd also get equity in any drugs that come to market based on your research. I'd been making $85,000 when I left. Marcus had always made me feel like my salary was insignificant compared to his $1 million bonuses. Suddenly, I realized I might end up making more than him. For the next 3 months, I played the role of the oblivious wife perfectly. I continued to cook his favorite meals, attend his work functions, and smile adoringly while he introduced me as my beautiful wife who takes such good care of me. All while documenting his every move and building my case. The hardest part wasn't the pretending. It was rediscovering who I was underneath all the damage he'd done. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Rachel Stone, who specialized in helping women recover from psychological abuse. You're not crazy, Sarah, she told me during one of our sessions. What you're describing is a textbook case of narcissistic abuse. The gaslighting, the erosion of self-esteem, the isolation from your career and identity. It's all designed to make you dependent on his validation. But I loved him, I said, still struggling to understand how I'd gotten so lost. I'm sure you did, but love shouldn't require you to disappear. Those words hit me like lightning. Love shouldn't require you to disappear. That's when I knew I wasn't just leaving Marcus. I was coming back to myself. Which brings me back to tonight, to this restaurant, to this moment. I'd suggested dinner at Chez Laurent to talk about our future. Marcus had been especially cruel lately, making comments about my failed career and how I was lucky he stayed with me despite my obvious inadequacies. I think he sensed that I was pulling away somehow, and his response was to tighten the screws. He'd dressed for dinner like he was going to a board meeting. Expensive suit, gold watch, that smug confidence that came from believing he held all the cards. He'd even brought flowers, yellow roses that he knew I hated, but that reminded him of his college girlfriend. "I thought we should discuss some changes," he'd said after ordering the most expensive wine on the menu without asking what I wanted. "I've been thinking about our future, and honestly, Sarah, I'm not sure you're the kind of partner I need anymore." He went on for 20 minutes about my deficiencies as a wife, how I'd let myself go despite the fact that I was in the best shape of my life, how I was boring despite the fact that I'd spent years learning to be interested in his hobbies while he'd never once asked about mine, how I was financially dependent on him despite the fact that I'd given up a lucrative career at his request. "The truth is," he concluded, cutting into his steak with surgical precision, "I regret marrying you. I should have chosen someone more suitable, someone who could have grown with me instead of holding me back." That's when I smiled and reached for the envelope. "You know what, Marcus? You're absolutely right. This marriage was a mistake. Lucky for you, I've taken care of it." His fork paused halfway to his mouth as I opened the envelope and began laying out its contents on the white tablecloth between us. First, the photographs, all 23 of them, plus about 30 more that Miranda had taken during her surveillance. Marcus with Amber at the Four Seasons. Marcus with Jessica on what was supposed to be a business trip to Miami. Marcus with Vanessa at a restaurant 2 blocks from where we were currently sitting. His face went pale, but he tried to maintain composure. "Sarah, I can explain." "Oh, we're just getting started," I said cheerfully, pulling out the next stack. "These are printouts of your text messages, all of them, including the ones where you describe your wife as pathetic, a dead fish, and embarrassing." Now his hands were shaking slightly. I could see him trying to calculate how much damage control he'd need to do, still believing this was something he could charm or intimidate his way out of. "And these," I continued, placing the financial documents on the table with deliberate care, "are copies of all your credit card statements, hotel receipts, and other expenses related to your affairs. Did you know that adultery nullifies prenups in New York? I didn't either, until I hired David Kim to represent me." Marcus's face had gone from pale to gray. "You hired David Kim?" "Oh, yes. He's very good. We've already filed for divorce, and given the mountain of evidence of your repeated adultery, I'm looking at a very favorable settlement. The apartment, the house in the Hamptons, half your investment portfolio, and spousal support for the next 5 years." He was gripping his wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. "Sarah, please, let's be reasonable." But I wasn't done. I pulled out the final stack of papers, and this time I couldn't keep the satisfaction out of my voice. "These are my favorites," I said. "Securities fraud is such a serious crime, don't you think? All those insider tips you got from pillow talk with women who worked at companies your firm was acquiring? The SEC is very interested in your trading patterns, Marcus. Very interested." Now he looked like he might vomit. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, I can. Miranda Walsh is an excellent private investigator. Former FBI, you know. She's already turned over her findings to the authorities. Apparently, your timing on those Amazon and Tesla options was statistically impossible without inside information." I leaned back in my chair, finally feeling like I could breathe freely for the first time in years. "Oh, and Marcus, I'm going back to work. Full salary restoration plus a signing bonus that's more than you made last year. Turns out my little lab experiments are about to revolutionize cancer treatment. Who knew?" He sat there, staring at the evidence of his own destruction spread across the table like a feast. The smug confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by something I'd never seen in him before. Genuine fear. "What do you want?" he whispered. "I don't want anything from you," I said, standing up and putting on my coat. "I wanted my life back, and I've got it. The divorce papers are being served tomorrow. Your office will probably get a visit from federal agents sometime next week. I'd suggest you find a good criminal attorney." I picked up my purse and the envelope, leaving all the evidence on the table for him to contemplate. "Oh, and Marcus, I really did love you once, but love shouldn't require someone to disappear." I walked out of Chez Laurent with my head high, leaving him sitting alone at table 12, surrounded by the ruins of his own making. 3 weeks later, I was back in my lab, leading a team of 12 researchers in groundbreaking immunotherapy trials. My signing bonus had allowed me to buy a beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn, and I'd filled it with plants that were thriving under my care. Marcus was arrested on securities fraud charges 2 days after the divorce was finalized. The story made the financial papers, and several of his colleagues reached out to express their shock at his behavior. His conviction came with a hefty fine and a 5-year prison sentence. Amber, Jessica, and Vanessa all testified against him in exchange for immunity in the insider trading case. Turns out they'd all known about each other and had been comparing notes for months. They were just waiting for someone else to make the first move. I never spoke to Marcus again after that night in the restaurant, but I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd lost everything. His job, his reputation, his freedom. The apartment and the house in the Hamptons sold quickly to pay his legal fees. People sometimes ask me if I feel bad about destroying his life so completely. The answer is no. I don't feel bad at all. I feel free. Because here's what I learned. Revenge isn't about hurting someone else. Real revenge is getting your life back. It's refusing to disappear. It's remembering who you were before someone convinced you that you were less than you are. Marcus didn't destroy my life. He just made me temporarily forget how powerful I was. And when I remembered, when I stopped trying to be the woman he wanted and started being the woman I actually am, I became unstoppable. 6 months after our divorce was final, my research team achieved a breakthrough in immunotherapy that could revolutionize cancer treatment. We're entering phase 2 trials next year, and early results suggest we might have found a way to train the immune system to recognize and destroy cancer cells with unprecedented precision. I'm not just back to who I was before Marcus. I'm better, stronger, more confident, more myself than I've ever been. Sometimes I drive past Chez Laurent and remember that night. Not with anger or sadness, but with gratitude. Because that was the night I stopped disappearing and started becoming. Love shouldn't require you to disappear. But sometimes, you have to disappear someone else's version of you to find yourself again. And when you do, when you finally stop shrinking to fit into someone else's small idea of who you should be, that's when you realize you were never the problem. You were always the solution. 2 years have passed since that night at Chez Laurent. Yesterday, I received a letter from the state prison where Marcus is serving his sentence. He wants to see me, wants to apologize, wants to explain how sorry he is, how much he's changed, how prison has given him time to reflect on what he lost. I read the letter twice, then fed it to my paper shredder. There's nothing he could say that would matter to me now. His apologies can't give me back the 3 years I spent doubting myself, the career momentum I lost, the confidence he systematically destroyed. His regret can't undo the damage he did to my sense of self-worth. But here's the beautiful thing. I don't need his apology to heal. I don't need his acknowledgement of wrongdoing to move forward. I don't need anything from him at all. My life is full in ways I never imagined possible when I was married to him. The immunotherapy trials I'm leading have shown remarkable results. We're looking at a 73% success rate in early-stage cancers, and the pharmaceutical companies are already bidding for licensing rights. The research that Marcus dismissed as little lab experiments is going to save thousands of lives and make me independently wealthy beyond anything he ever achieved through his corrupt trading schemes. Last month, I was featured on the cover of Scientific American. The headline read, "The Cancer Fighter, How Dr. Sarah Chen's Revolutionary Approach is Changing Everything." I kept a copy on my desk for weeks, not out of vanity, but as a reminder of who I really am when no one is trying to diminish me. I've started dating again, though I'm in no rush. Dr. Michael Torres, a fellow researcher who collaborates with our lab, has been asking me to dinner for months. He's brilliant, kind, and when he looks at me, I see respect and genuine interest in my thoughts. He asks about my work not because he's humoring me, but because he finds it fascinating. When I told him about my past marriage, he was horrified at how Marcus had treated me. "You're extraordinary," he said simply. Anyone who couldn't see that was blind. It's strange how healing those words were, not because I needed his validation, but because they reminded me that healthy people don't try to tear down the ones they claim to love. The brownstone in Brooklyn has become my sanctuary. I've turned the top floor into a home office where I can work on research papers in the evenings, surrounded by the thriving plants that Marcus once mocked me for not being able to keep alive. Turns out I'm quite good at nurturing things when I'm not constantly being told I'm doing it wrong. My relationship with my family has healed too. During the worst years with Marcus, I'd gradually pulled away from my parents and sister, embarrassed by how small my life had become. They'd tried to express concern about how I was changing, but Marcus had convinced me they were jealous of our sophisticated lifestyle. Now I realized they were just worried about losing the vibrant, confident woman they'd raised. "We have our Sarah back," my mother said last Christmas, hugging me tightly. "We missed you so much." I keep in touch with Miranda, the private investigator who helped gather the evidence that brought Marcus down. She's become an unlikely friend, someone who understands the particular satisfaction that comes from exposing a predator. She told me recently that 3 more women have come forward with stories about Marcus, women he'd manipulated and abused before me. They're planning a civil lawsuit, and Miranda asked if I'd be willing to testify about the pattern of behavior. I said yes immediately. Not for revenge this time, but for justice. For all the women who might cross paths with men like Marcus in the future. The strangest part of this whole experience has been discovering that I'm not unique. Since news of Marcus's conviction became public, I've been contacted by dozens of women with similar stories. Successful, intelligent women who found themselves slowly erased by partners who claimed to love them, while systematically destroying their confidence and autonomy. I've started speaking at events for divorced women, sharing my story not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that it's possible to come back from complete self-annihilation. That you can rebuild not just your life, but your sense of self. That the person you were before the abuse is still there, waiting to be remembered and reclaimed. The most important thing to understand, I tell these audiences, is that leaving isn't enough. You have to actively choose to become yourself again. You have to remember that you were whole before they convinced you that you were broken. Last week, I received an invitation that made me laugh out loud. Chez Laurent is hosting a Women in Science fundraising dinner, and they want me as the keynote speaker. The irony is perfect. I'm going to stand in the same room where Marcus tried to destroy me and talk about the breakthrough research that defines my life now. I've already written my speech. It begins. 2 years ago, I sat at table 12 in this very restaurant and made the decision to stop disappearing. Sometimes people ask me if I ever think about what might have happened if I'd tried harder to save my marriage. If I'd been more patient, more understanding, more willing to work on myself. The answer is that I don't waste mental energy on counterfactuals. I know exactly what would have happened. I would have disappeared completely. Marcus didn't see me as a person with my own dreams, goals, and inherent worth. He saw me as an accessory to his life, something to be molded and shaped to fit his image of success. When I stopped cooperating with that vision, when I started remembering who I actually was, he ramped up the psychological pressure to bring me back in line. But here's what he never understood. You can't permanently break someone who knows their own worth. You can make them forget it temporarily, convince them to suppress it, gaslight them into doubting it. But if that person ever remembers who they really are, they become unstoppable. I am living proof of that truth. The cancer research continues to exceed every expectation. We're expanding to 3 more trial sites, and early indicators suggest we may have found a way to prevent certain cancers entirely, not just treat them. The woman who was once told her work was insignificant is now leading research that could eliminate one of humanity's greatest killers. The financial success has been staggering too. My equity stake in the resulting pharmaceuticals is already worth more than Marcus made in his best year, and we're still in early trials. The signing bonus I mentioned to him that night at dinner was just the beginning. I'm now in negotiations for research funding that would make me one of the highest paid scientists in the country. But the money isn't why I do this work. I do it because every day I get to see proof that I was right all along. The research Marcus dismissed as unimportant is actually revolutionary. The woman he called pathetic is actually extraordinary. The life he convinced me was worthless is actually invaluable. I've learned to trust my instincts again, something Marcus had systematically trained out of me. When something feels wrong, I pay attention to that feeling instead of dismissing it as oversensitivity. When someone's behavior doesn't match their words, I believe the behavior. When I have an idea or insight, I pursue it instead of second-guessing myself into paralysis. Most importantly, I've learned to recognize the early warning signs of psychological manipulation, the subtle put-downs disguised as concern, the isolation from friends and family, the constant criticism that chips away at self-confidence, the gaslighting that makes you question your own perceptions and memories. I share these lessons not just with divorced women, but with my young female colleagues in the lab. I watch them carefully for signs that partners or supervisors might be undermining their confidence. I make sure they know that their work matters, their ideas are valuable, their voices deserve to be heard. Never let anyone convince you to make yourself smaller, I tell them. The right people will celebrate your success, not feel threatened by it. Marcus taught me one valuable lesson, though I doubt he intended to. The most dangerous person in your life isn't the one who openly attacks you. It's the one who claims to love you while slowly convincing you that you're not worthy of that love. It's the one who makes you grateful for scraps of affection while they feast on your diminished sense of self-worth. Recognition of that dynamic saved my life. Not in a dramatic, immediate sense, but in the truest way possible. It saved me from disappearing entirely. Tonight, as I finish writing up the latest research findings that will soon be published in Nature Medicine, I think about the envelope that changed everything. It wasn't just filled with evidence of Marcus's crimes and betrayals. It was filled with proof of my own strength, my own worth, my own refusal to disappear quietly. That envelope represented the moment I stopped being a victim and became the author of my own story again. And what a story it's becoming. The best revenge, I've learned, isn't destroying someone else's life. It's building a life so full, so meaningful, so authentically your own, that their opinion of you becomes completely irrelevant. Marcus spent 5 years trying to convince me I was ordinary, unimportant, forgettable. He was wrong about all of it. I am extraordinary. My work is revolutionizing medicine, and I am absolutely unforgettable. Not because of what I did to him, but because of what I became when I stopped letting him define me. That's the real victory. That's the real revenge. That's the real ending to this story. I didn't just survive Marcus Blackwell. I transcended him. And every single day I live authentically as myself is proof that love should never require you to disappear. The woman who walked into Chez Laurent that night was already free. She just didn't know it yet. Now she does. Now I do, and I will never forget it again. Forget.